Is the first of its kind deal to avert the worst effects of climate change, but the language is weaker than the quote phasing out of fossil fuels, which more than 100 countries had been lobbying for in Dubai. We're going to talk more about that now with Friederike. Friederike, welcome. You're Vice President of Global Policy and Advocacy for the NGO Global Citizen. You were in Dubai just last week. What do you think about this new climate agreement? Does it not go far enough?
It does not go far enough. It is progress. That's for sure. It's a step in the right direction, but it's not the big leap that we need. And that was possible because we followed the negotiations and much stronger wording was on the table. And as you said, we had more than 2/3 of all countries backing very clear language to phase out fossil fuels. And this is the way to go.
So the text does not refer clearly to this phasing out, but for the first time in 30 years of climate talk history, it does for the first time mention fossil fuels. Is that a big victory unto itself?
It is, definitely. We needed to have fossil fuels in there because what we realized is that just focusing on cutting emissions, that is the demand, is not sufficient. We also need to cut production, the supply of fossil fuels. So it's very important that fossil fuels, the main driver of climate change, are now specifically mentioned. However, they came up with this transitioning away. I would say it's the start of, or it's the beginning of the end of fossil fuels, so that's important. But it would have been better to give a clear direction because, of course, what we need is urgent action now. The objective is actually to get to net zero in 2050. It seems far away, but it actually starts now. And so what we must ensure now is that production goes down and not up. Unfortunately, the agreement doesn't provide enough clarity for that. But we're counting on all of these countries, so more than 130 countries that were very clear, that agreed with science, that said we need to phase out fossil fuels, because now we need to obviously move to implementation, and this is where their steer would be very important.
You've also said that now the door is left wide open for carbon capture technology, which, in your words, is a total mirage. Tell me about that.
Yes, this is another weakness of the text. It actually leaves loopholes and distractions away from the main objective that needs to be phased out of fossil fuels. And one is the carbon capture technology. This technology, first of all, is extremely expensive. It's not effective yet, and it will only have marginal impact. So it shouldn't look as if, thanks to that technology, we can basically go about our business as usual. We cannot. We must reduce and eventually phase out the production of fossil fuels. And this is where the text is not sufficiently clear. I also want to say this technology is extremely expensive, and this is even more the mention of it or the place, the room given in the agreement is more the shocking because we lack funding for renewable investments, and we also lack funding, for instance, for adaptation. You mentioned the small island nations. They urgently need more support. In recent years, actually, funding for adaptation decreased. So we cannot talk about expensive technology that is probably just getting us off the track. We need to invest the money where we really need it.
That's interesting because I think for many countries, this notion of carbon capture technology is actually something that speaks to many of them, and that's something that they would like to go toward. That's interesting to get your point of view. Now, you were at the climate talks in Dubai. What's it like there? How do the different committees go about hammering out these kinds of deals, and where are the problems?
It's very busy. It's a UN negotiation, so all the countries are there, which is very important, I think. It's important that there's an inclusive process, that countries like the small island nations or very poor countries are actually being heard, which is not the case if we look at negotiations at the G20, for instance. So that's important. There are real negotiations happening and on a lot of tracks. So I was just mentioning financing that got a little bit less attention today, but there were different tracks of negotiations here. And I think what is also important that civil society is there.